For the longest time now, I've always had people asking me like, hey, how do I get into video game collecting? Where should I start? Where do I buy things? And today I just kind of wanted to give you guys a couple of tips on how to get into game collecting. And even if you already game collect, or even if you consider yourself to be somewhat knowledgeable about game collecting, who knows? Maybe there's something in this video that even you could find useful. So the very first tip that I have for you guys would be to learn the market and also learn reasonable game prices. So say we look at a game like Dark Souls 2 here, right? Like usually when you get this game on eBay, you can get it for anywhere between like $8 to $15 depending on the seller, depending on the condition, depending on whether or not it's CIB. But on the other hand, you might also find some super scummy seller on that same site or on Macari or maybe even at like a garage sale that's trying to sell this game to you for like $30. And I can tell you right now, in no universe should you be spending $30 on a copy of Dark Souls 2. I'm not even talking about like the game's quality, I'm just talking about like the game's value. If it's sealed, that's a different situation. But you know, when we're talking about just like a used copy that's already been opened, like just learn your prices and learn what games are actually worth. There's tons of prices out there like videogamepricecharting.com, that's a great one. And even beyond that, if you're ever out in public or if you're just trying to get like an average on like, okay, what do these games go for? Literally just search it up on eBay or Macari, and usually what I do is I search from like the lowest price plus shipping and then just kind of go from there, because you really want to try to find the best bang for buck while also getting a good condition game. So usually what I look for is a game that's clean with minimal stickers. Like if it's covered in stickers, I won't go for it, but if there's only 1 or 2 stickers but it's for a good price, I'll still pick it up. And just, you know, even if there is some sticker residue, what you can do then is order some Goo Gone off our Amazon, and then, you know, that'll take it off and it's almost like a brand new copy at that point. And then in the long term, you'll be saving yourself a ton of money if you can do that, speaking from experience. So while you want to learn the prices so that on one hand you can't get scammed and have somebody try to sell you a game that's, you know, like for way more than it's actually worth, you also want to learn the prices, because then who knows, you might be able to find a game for a steal of a price for like a fraction of the cost that it normally goes for online. So it can really benefit you both ways. In one way, so you don't get scammed, but also you might be able to find some really good deals that way. And plus, if you would ever want to open up your own store, start your own eBay store, and just start selling video games, obviously at that point, then you would really want to learn the market, because, you know, when you're getting into a business, it's the most important thing. The first thing you should do is learn the market and learn the pricing of everything. TLDR, or I guess in this case, TLDW. Learn your prices and always get things for as cheap as possible, but in as best of condition as possible. My next tip would be to find retro game stores near you. Now, for the longest time, I only collected exclusively online. Like 95% of my collection, and I'd say actually more like 80% of my collection that I have right now, I just acquired through like buying stuff off of eBay, Macari, Amazon, etc. But I can tell you, because lately, you know, in the last couple weeks and months and stuff like that, you know, I've been trying to go outside of my comfort zone, look for some retro game stores near me, and man, some of the prices, some of the bundles, some of the deals that you can find at these retro game stores is pretty insane. The one retro game store near me that I go to all the time, you know, I go out there and I find games I normally go for anywhere from like $8 to $12 for like $3 or $4 there. And it might not sound like that big of a difference, but you gotta remember that's literally 50% of the price, and that adds up over time, because at that point, when it comes to like how far your money can go, say I only have $10 to spend on one game on eBay, or I could go to that store and get three $3 games. And in literally every case, when I go to that retro game store, like I compare the prices online to that, and it's like, yeah, I can either buy it for $10 on eBay or buy it for $3 here. Like for example, I went there the one day to pick up like Skyrim, Rage, and then Battlefield Bad Company, and like all together, if I would have got those separately on eBay, at minimum, I would have been looking at like $20 if I would have had to buy everything separately. But instead, I was able to get Bad Company for like $5, Skyrim for $3, Rage for like $5. And that $20 on eBay was being generous. If anything, it would probably be more like 25 to 30 if we're being honest. And plus, when it comes to buying off of people on eBay or Macari, while it is always good to do that, because at that point, like, you know, you for the most part, you are usually supporting smaller businesses or independent sellers that could really use the money or are really trying to do something cool on eBay. Sometimes you also gotta be careful, because there is also just a lot of scummy people trying to just get as much money out of you as possible. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword there. But for the most part, if you can find a good retro game store near you, not only is it great for your wallet, but you also get to support a small business, which is awesome. But at the same time, like I said, like always look for those retro game stores, but also don't be afraid of buying off of eBay or Macari. Like if you do find a good deal on there, or it's just like, hey, it isn't that much and I really don't feel like leaving my house right now, or I don't feel like leaving my house period, there's nothing wrong with that. Like even me, I literally, even though I just visited a retro game store yesterday, they didn't even necessarily have the one game I was looking for. So I just went onto eBay and just, you know, put a couple orders in. Whether it's a retro game store, or whether it's a seller on eBay, again, it's always nice to support independent like sellers, or, you know, just small businesses in general. Just, it kind of ties back into the first point though. Just make sure you're not getting scammed, and don't pay for anything unreasonable. Like don't give in to the scammers and the, you know, scummy people on those sites. My next tip, in the very beginning, I would always recommend buying lots. So like if you have a couple of games that you're looking for, say, I'll just throw out some random games, for example, Borderlands, Brink, Call of Duty World at War, and like Forza or something like that. And then, you know, you like look up a lot on like Mercari or eBay. You're like, I don't know, Call of Duty World at War lot. And then all of a sudden you come across a lot that has like World of War, Borderlands, Forza, and what was the other one that I can't even remember. I literally just said it, I forget. Obviously, as you collect more and more, that strategy won't work as much, just because, like, obviously then you're going to be running into a lot of duplicates. Like me nowadays, I can't buy lots because, like, every time that I find a lot, there's always at least one, if not like 5 duplicates in those lots, you know. The lots, they go for anywhere between, and when I say lot, lots are also just like another term for bundles, so you'll find a lot of these, and a lot of these, no pun intended. So literally just go into eBay or Mercari and just search up like Xbox 360 game lot, and you'll see it. They go for anywhere from like $10, where it's only like 2 or 3 games, all the way up to like 100, where you're getting like 20 plus games in one lot. And again, in the beginning, it is a really great way to just collect a lot of games. Like if you're, I'm not necessarily saying that you should focus on quantity over quality, because obviously, which that's another thing we'll talk about later, like you always want to focus on like games that you actually want to play. Like, I mean, for some people, like if you're going for a complete set, that's a different situation. Like if you're going for a complete Wii U set, then yeah, sure, just go for whatever, get as many lots as possible in the beginning. But, you know, also make sure that there are games that, you know, you'd actually be interested in, because at the end of the day, anybody can, you know, fill up bookshelves of games and get like hundreds of games if they're just buying copies of NHL and NBA, since those games, after the year that they're relevant in, they only go for like $2. So yeah, you could totally do it that way. But if you find a lot that's like a good deal, I would usually say a good deal is anywhere between, you know, find it where like every game in the lot averages out to like $5 or less. Usually the only time that I really jump on lots nowadays is when it's like $2-3 per game, maybe $4 per game if it's like a lot of really quality stuff in there and it's like bang for buck, I really gotta get that. And even then, you know, it's usually a good idea to add up the values otherwise. But if the games inside the lot interest you, that's a great way to get started. The next tip is to buy whatever you want, but also go outside of your comfort zone. So for example, say you're working on your PS4 collection, and normally you only buy NBA, NHL, Madden, or some other safe games like that, and you're like, hey, you know, I want to collect every NBA game on PS4. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then say maybe your taste expands, you're like, hey, I want to try some other games. At that point, go crazy. Like, go outside of your comfort zone. And even if you don't get to that point, even if you know you do have one thing in mind, like, okay, I'm just gonna collect like every Call of Duty on this system, switch it up a little bit. Just go outside your comfort zone. Like, if you have that one time where it's like, hey, I got an extra like $5-10 to spare, let's set that aside so I can save up for another game. Or even if you find another game for, you know, like that cheap, then just like, hey, you know, let me throw my money at that. Let me give it a shot. Like, you know, throw your money at a Persona game, throw your money at a Souls game, throw it at a Fallout game. I can't tell you how many times over the course of the last 2 decades that I've done that with games, and I've, you know, just ended up finding like one of my new favorite games, or it's just like, hey, I'm gonna buy this game, I'm gonna try it out, and then I end up absolutely falling in love with it. The way I see it, think about video games the same way that you would with food. It's one of those things where you should always keep an open mind, because it's like, hey, sure, I may not have a lot of experience with a food like this, or a food that uses this kind of seasoning, or hey, that's cooked in this certain way, but who knows, it might be my new favorite thing. You should always treat video games, or really any entertainment like that, movies, music, video games, you should treat every form of entertainment and art like that, because at the end of the day, video games are art, and all forms of art deserve to be appreciated and enjoyed and experienced by as many people as possible. My next tip would to always be buy new systems. Now, obviously, I know systems can be a bit more expensive, but if you're able to find some good deals, or if you're really trying to get serious about stuff, I'm telling you, buy some new systems, explore that system's exclusives, and furthermore, to get really interesting with it, if you go back to like the 16-bit era, or even not even the 16-bit era, like the early 2000s, for example, where you got like games with the same name coming out on different platforms. So I think, for example, like Captain America Super Soldier, you had one version exclusive to the DS, and then you had one that came out for the 3DS and the Wii, and then there was one for the PS3, Xbox 360, and PC, and all 3 of those were 3 completely different versions. And then when you go back to like the 16-bit era with the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, for example, you had games like Aladdin, where they're very similar in both platforms, but they're different at the same time. There was a lot of games like that, so always explore not only other systems, but again, their libraries and their exclusives, whether it's something, you know, like, you know, modern consoles like Xbox and PlayStation, and, you know, going to Xbox and picking up all the Halo games, you're going to PlayStation and picking up all the exclusives over there, or, you know, Nintendo, all the consoles that they've had, all the exclusives that they have. It is a little bit more expensive to collect for Nintendo stuff, but it's always worth it, because Nintendo is just, I mean, it's Nintendo. It's just absolutely legendary games on those platforms. But if you only have like an Xbox One or an Xbox Series X or a PS5 in your collection, go a little crazy with it. Go out and pick up a PS2. Go pick up a PS3. Go pick up a SNES. Go pick up an NES. I can tell you firsthand, I literally collect for like every console. Like, when I'm looking at my shelf and in my drawers and like all the other games that I have, like there's literally not a single console that I can think of that I don't actively collect for. Like, I'm literally looking at my shelf, and on the one shelf there's literally a mismatch of like some Atari stuff, some PS1 stuff, some DS stuff, some 3DS stuff, there's 360 stuff, a big box PC game, Nintendo Switch, and then I've also got stuff for like Super Nintendo, original Nintendo, Turbo Graphics. Like, and there's literally not a single console that I don't own at least one game for. Like, I did that intentionally. I literally made an active effort a couple years ago to make sure that I had at least one game for like every platform that like ever. The only exceptions to that would be like really obscure consoles that weren't released in America, even like the 64DD, for example. That's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you know, the 64DD, that's like one of the last ones I gotta pick something up for, but you know, we'll get there when we get there. Another thing worth highlighting is that some games cost more on different platforms. So once again, I only have a couple games next to me, so we'll just gotta grab Dark Souls 2 again. It doesn't apply to this game, but for sometimes, you know, Dark Souls 2 could go for $12 on PS3 on average, but then it could also go for $20 on average on 360 or vice versa. So again, if you have both platforms, or if you're looking to collect for multiple platforms from like the same generation, always look and see what the prices are on different platforms, because you know that even that in itself could end up saving you a lot of money. Because again, it's one of those things where like, hey, even if in some cases a game is only like a $1 difference on average on certain consoles, like that $1 adds up over time. Say by the time you buy 100 games, well, that's $100 that you saved, even if you're only saving like $1 per game. And it's not even going to be one of those things where it's like, hey, every game is more expensive on PS3, so now you got to go to the 360 because all the games are cheaper there. I can tell you firsthand, like that is not the case. Sometimes some games are just more expensive on 360, whereas on the other hand, some games are just more expensive on PS3. It really just depends on the game. And vice versa, if you collect for the Wii and you go for those games from like the early, because there was that point, right, where like the halfway point of the 7th generation, I want to say, is when that cutoff happened. If you're collecting for the Wii alongside like the PS3 and 360, for example, it's 9 times out of 10 the game is also going to be the cheapest on the Wii. Sure, it won't be like an HD version of it, but if you're trying to save as much money as possible, then I mean, hey, you know, there's a route right there for you. Now, the next 2 tips could technically be tied into one, but they're kind of different, so I'm going to keep them separately just to put emphasis on each one. The first tip being, avoid GameStop cases. Do you see this disgrace? This is my copy of Star Wars Bounty Hunter. I was talking about it in the last video that I made about video game collecting called Things I Hate About Video Game Collecting. And this happens to be just probably one of, if not the thing that I hate most about video game collecting, is these GameStop cases. Again, you know, the game is inside. I've had it for, I got this game at some point in the 2000s, and you know, it's a great game, but the case, not so great. I don't care what kind of collector you are, even if you only care about having the game, no, one day you will regret having this ugly thing on your shelf. Just save yourself the pain and the trauma later, and just don't buy these. Just go get a game. If you do have to buy these for some reason, if this is the only copy left on Earth of like whatever game you're looking for, at least print out the cover art. Anything is better than this garbage. And then the next one, for me personally, I usually try to avoid these, but for some people they may actually be nice for one reason or another, which we'll get to, and that will be wary of greatest hits cases. Now, for me personally, I don't really like having greatest hits cases all that much. I was talking about that again in that video where it's like, hey, I prefer to just kind of have the black label, but at the same time, for some consoles, they're not as bad. Now, if we go back to like the early days of the 360 with the platinum hits, where it's like that giant platinum square and only a tiny section for the cover art, yeah, absolutely despise those. Those things are hideous. But for something like the PS3, as much as I would prefer a black label, I can live with this. It still looks decent enough, and, you know, it does kind of have, like, that, you know, bloody maroon red that I was talking about, where it's like, yeah, you know, like, compare, when it's lined up on the shelf, it looks, I don't know, just kind of, like, throws off the neat symmetry of all the PS3 cases. But then again, in itself, you know, there's already 2 different types of PS3 cases. You got the ones from the early part of the generation with the Spider-Man font on the side and the little red header, and then they switched it up later to where, you know, the PS3 thing is on top, kind of like how it is here, with just, you know, the PS3 thing on the side, except it's black. So there's already a bit of inconsistency there, but then when you toss in the greatest hits cases and these things, it's just like, you know what, again, on their own, they look alright, but I don't know, it's one of those things where it's just like, I'd rather just have, like, all the black labels there, just because that's how I am as a collector. I like having that first print run edition of the game, but on the other hand, it is kind of cool, because when you have a greatest hits case, it's like, hey, this game earned its spot in the greatest hits. It sold enough copies to get here, you know, it was acclaimed for one reason or another, like, you know, it earned this case. And furthermore, not all collectors are like me, you know, some people actually literally actively collect all greatest hits, you know, and that's great for them. And furthermore, like I was saying before, I'm the type of guy, I like to just get like the first print run original copy of the game. Like the game that released on day one, that's the copy that I want, with the black label, with whatever the cover art was, none of the splashy text, none of the other stuff like there is here, just like this. However, for some people, for the greatest hits versions, sometimes, and this is another thing that's kind of like depends on the game, sometimes the greatest hits versions are the only ones that include the DLC on disc, which from a preservation perspective is pretty cool. However, I must put an asterisk besides that, because that was more of a thing during the PS2 generation, where in some cases, like Devil May Cry 3, for example, the greatest hits version was more or less like, obviously DLC wasn't really a thing at that time, but it was more of like a special edition of the game, whereas, you know, like the normal black label didn't have some of the features, like, you know, the first print run black label didn't have some of the features that were there on that greatest hits version. But once we got to the PS3 generation, we did see a lot of times where we would see both a black label version of like the cool Game of the Year editions as well as the greatest hits version. So it really just depends, you know. It's one of those things where you gotta do your research on the game. Like, hey, in some cases, even for this like Game of the Year edition, there is a black label of this very Dead Island version. So, you know, I could always replace this down the line and get that instead. But it's one of those things where it's like, hey, you know, I already had the greatest hits version. It is what it is. I'm cool with it in my collection. Like I said, some people actively collect these. But again, it's just one of those things where I like bringing it to people's attention before they get into collecting, you know, just so they don't have those moments down the line where they're looking back and like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. Or, you know, in some other cases where it's like, oh man, I wish I would have went for that. So, you know, again, depends on the person. My next tip, don't buy digital. Now, I've heard some funny people over the years. They're like, I'm a digital collector. What are you collecting? Licenses to have access to games for a temporary amount of time? Now, I won't lie. I have bought digital games before. I still buy digital games sometimes. Like, for example, I was talking about this again in the last video, where sometimes there's games that go for like $30+ for the Xbox 360, but they always go on sale for like $5 or less on, you know, Xbox Series and all that. So it's like, hey, it's backwards compatible. It's literally $5, whereas a physical copy would cost $30. It's cool, I'll just buy this one time. And then down the line, if I'm like, oh, I absolutely need that game in my collection, then I could go out and buy it. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's such a niche situation, and it's such a niche case where unless it's a situation where, you know, the physical version is so expensive that you would be better off buying it digitally, I would always 100% of the time say go buy physical. Because, like, you know, some people are like, what's the convenience factor? You know, what? The convenience factor of not having to get up off your butt and change the disc? It takes like 5 seconds. And the only reason I say this is because just think, what happens if your account gets shut down, when they shut the store down inevitably, and like, oh, just think about the Wii U, right? That console is literally only 12 years old, and yet they shut down the eShop last year. That means that eShop only lasted for 11 years, so those digital games are only available for that amount of time, and granted, you can still re-download the games that you purchased, but they even already confirmed that that's not going to be a feature like long-term. So like, and again, it's one of those things we were talking about earlier where Nintendo games tend to be more expensive, so your whole like Wii U library is just going to go bye-bye. Same thing with 3DS, gonna go bye-bye. Granted, there is other means of acquiring digital media that we're not going to talk about in this video because I'm not going to advocate for one thing or another. That's, you know, completely up to each individual person as to how they acquire their games. But when we're just talking from an official means, yeah, you're buying a license to a game. We've already seen this with Ubisoft, where they've been like delisting like DLC for like certain Assassin's Creed games and stuff like that, and they were even trying to get to the point of where like even if you purchased it, you couldn't have access to it, because again, when you read like the EULAs and the terms and conditions and all that, like it literally says in there, hey, we can take this away from you at any time. You're just buying a license to it. And if you don't believe me, go and read that stuff. Read the end user license agreements. Go read the terms and conditions. They literally say in there, hey, yeah, this isn't a permanent service, and if we want to take this from you, we can. And again, if you lose access to your account, well, that's it. Whereas with all the games that I have on my shelf, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I lose access to my account, if I buy a different system. Like, it literally doesn't matter. Well, I know in the case of digital, I mean, you can take it to other systems, but you know what I mean. Like, it doesn't matter if it's on the same account, if I set the settings, whatever. It's put in the disc and play. Simple as that. And furthermore, even after games get delisted off the digital storefronts, which happens like all the time nowadays, that data is still on the disc. So while sure, during the new generation, there's a lot of times where like, hey, even when you put a disc into your console, you have to go through the whole download and installation process. But that's not the point that matters. The point that matters is, again, once the games get delisted off a digital storefront, that's it. You can't ever play it again. Whereas when you have the disc, even if it's a situation like Cyberpunk 1.0, where if you're not able to update the game, it is a little broken on that original Xbox One and PS4 disc, at least you have the data there, and in 99.9% of cases, that isn't actually like how broken most games are on the disc. Sure, some games are incomplete on the disc, or like, you know, aren't as polished, I should say, but at the very least, at least the data is there, and at least you can play something. At least there's something tangible there to experience the game, and for the most part, most games are released on disc are actually complete, and that Cyberpunk 1.0 example is a very niche or rare example. And my final tip of the day, it's pretty simple. Just start. There's no rules. Nobody's telling you what console to buy for, what consoles to buy, what games to buy, what games not to buy, where to buy them, where not to buy them. Just start, you know? If you're at Walmart and you see, hey, a new Pokemon game looks fun, just grab it. Grab both of them if you want them. Oh, you see an old Pokemon game you want? Go ahead and pick it up. Even if it's a couple $100. Who cares? Just go for it. You're at a retro game store and you see an Assassin's Creed for $3, get it. If you see a copy of Super Mario All-Stars for $30, get it. Who cares? If there's something nostalgic you want to pick up from your childhood, go get it. If there's something that, you know, you were too young to experience, like say you grew up after the age of like the PS2, for which, let me just say my heart goes out to you. Personally, I grew up during the entire PS2 generation, and I just couldn't feel more blessed. But if you missed that absolutely wonderful console, then you could always go back, buy a PS2, buy some games for it. It doesn't matter what it is, what you want to go for. If it's a video game that exists, just give it a shot. Go for it. Have fun. Always keep your eyes peeled. Always be collecting. And just, you know, again, whether you buy something that you're familiar with, something you've been wanting, or going outside of your comfort zone, it doesn't matter. Just buy games. Have fun. Make sure you're not going too crazy with your money. Obviously, make sure that, you know, you save enough for, like, groceries and bills and stuff like that. But as long as you set enough aside for necessities, then go crazy. But anyways, those are just some of the tips that kind of came to mind when I was going to make this video. Now I'd love to hear from you guys. Did you guys learn anything from this video? Are you trying to get into game collecting? Have you been into game collecting for a while, but we're kind of looking for some other advice? Did anything in this video help you? Is there maybe something else that I should have mentioned in this video? Just whatever it is, whatever thinking, I would definitely love to hear from you guys. But anyway, as always, massive shout out, thank you to all the Patreons and channel members, thank you to all in the low ball tier, and a big shout out, thank you to all in the mid ball tier, Melasky, Matani, Manny, the biggest shout out, thanks to all in the G tier, Run Events, Stone, the Cheese Girl, thank you guys so much, you guys are literal legends, I love you. Thank you guys for watching, have an amazing day, stay beautiful, I love you all, peace.